Hello, and welcome to today's episode. So, I'm going to be talking about something that happens commonly in families where there's abuse or in toxic families or just families with complicated dynamics, which is that often there's first of all, whatever is kind of said, whether hurtful or not, is okay somehow, right? It's kind of allowed, it's permitted. But the idea of talking about how you feel outside of the family, maybe sharing what's been difficult, maybe sharing what's been going on, what it's been feeling like for you, that is very taboo, and that suddenly makes you disloyal. It's kind of breaking the family code, if you like. So I want to talk about this and thinking about this in light of if you were a child and you found yourself often feeling very difficult feelings at home, whether you felt rejected, whether you felt heavily criticized, whether you felt that you were not loved or that you were not liked or kind of on the outside in some way. And if you maybe witnessed a lot of parental arguments, or you maybe saw things happening at home that just were unsettling. And I want to think about this. So, if you were a child experiencing that and then you weren't allowed to talk about it, right? So, you weren't allowed to mention this to your friends, to certainly to whoever else you might do, whether it's teachers if you were young, or to maybe other adults that you had in your life. Perhaps you weren't allowed to talk about this beyond your immediate family, so maybe you weren't allowed to discuss how you were feeling even with your grandparents, let's say, or aunties or cousins, etc. I just want to talk about that experience and really the longer term impact of it, because this is a common experience for those with families who were more complex and on that emotionally unhealthier end of things. And it has a significant impact on your identity and on your sense of yourself, because what is happening during those years, those times when you are maybe one, in the evening, you're witnessing significant arguments, you're maybe part of those arguments, you're feeling scared, you're certainly in fight or flight mode in some way or another. You know that things are happening that you don't like, that ideally wouldn't be happening. You may not have a full sense of, that may feel like your norm, right? You may not have a full sense of how else it could be, because that's kind of hard to conceptualize as a child, but you still know that it feels unpleasant somehow. And then the next day, you're required to go into school or to go to your friend's house or to go to your family's house and pretend that everything's fine. And the expectation is that you are not discussing anything relating to these really big feelings that you would have been experiencing, that you are required not to talk about or acknowledge what is happening in your home, which is, of course, where you ideally would be feeling safe. Ideally, that is your kind of sanctuary, if you like, and that there are things happening that would disrupting that sanctuary, disrupting that sense of safety at home, and yet you are required to not acknowledge it. And often within these types of families, there's not much acknowledgement within the family either, right? There's not necessarily going to have been then a kind of sit down family meeting where you kind of discuss what happened and your parents explain why, and you can ask questions and you can freely express yourself. That probably wasn't happening either. So then as a consequence, what is happening for you maybe as a child, or for children in these circumstances, is that you're holding a lot of really big, confusing feelings. You're witnessing confusing events or conversations, and you are then required to develop a different persona. You need to, in order to survive life, in order to survive this period of your time, and also to keep your other relationships functioning, and to not contribute to the family breaking down in some way, you need to develop this other persona, this other version of yourself that doesn't connect with these big things happening in your life, right? So then what happens is this splitting of yourself, this this is what happens sometimes, and then I'm going to act as if I'm fine even though I'm not. So when this happens over a period of time, especially when you're developing, when you're in your childhood years, it means that you develop this ability to split yourself. You develop this ability to pretend you're fine when you're not, to develop a different way of being and of seeming and of behaving that fits your environment, rather than a way of being that fits with how you're feeling. There's a huge amount of suppression that also happens, whereby you have to ignore your feelings, ignore what maybe your body is telling you, ignore what you're wanting to do, maybe ignoring how you're feeling at your core, and you're having to feel a whole different way. You're having to seem and act in a very different way. And so this is a really powerful thing. It's powerful as a skill to learn, and it's a skill that would absolutely have been necessary to navigate your family life as a child, and also to develop and maintain other relationships, and also to just kind of maintain a functioning life as a child, right, beyond the dysfunctional home that you were experiencing. So that's a skill, it's really powerful. But also what it does as an adult, when you carry that skill forward, as we tend to do with all of the coping mechanisms, all of the skills that we learn as a child, we carry them forward. As an adult, then what it means is that you are used to not living authentically. You become used to not being your true self. Perhaps you don't even know what your true self is, or who or how you feel authentically, because you've gotten so used to switching modes in order to kind of fit in with wherever you are at that time. And you learned, as I say, in childhood, you learned this skill of detaching from what you're feeling, blocking out, suppressing what you've seen, what you've witnessed, what you've experienced, and then presenting in a whole different way to the world. And so then over the course of decades, this can become quite difficult and kind of troubling, really, as you want to be one integrated person, right? That's the mode that is the least tiring, is when you can just be yourself, be as you are, quite authentically. And of course we still have boundaries, of course we can still select what we say and what we don't say, and select our relationships and so on. We can still do all of that, but we're doing it from this place of oneness, of this is who I am and this is how I am, and there's an integration there. But if you've had to get used to not being integrated, you've had to get used to being split and being two different people, 3, 4, 5 different people sometimes, you've had to get used to really suppressing what you are feeling and ignoring it and kind of carrying on anyway in a different vein, then it means that as an adult, you're going to find it harder and harder to get back to that authentic self. So what can we do about it? So I would say that all of healing for me, recovering from your childhood, means recovering your connection to yourself. That's really what the whole process is about. There are lots of different ways to do that. And really it's about chipping away at accessing what you're authentically feeling, or what you're feeling in that moment. The more you can get back to what you are feeling and get a sense of that in a way that over time will become more and more automatic, then from there you can start making choices based on how you're feeling, based on what you're thinking, based on also who you want to be, who you want to become. And so we can kind of use all of these different signals and signs as something that we can then use to make decisions with. We can start responding to people from that place of connection to self, rather than responding to people based on what they want or need, or what they're kind of sending our way. Instead, life becomes about what's happening within you instead. So it's just something, though, to think about, maybe the impact of having to be secretive as a child. And, of course, all of this also breeds shame. This is where shame comes from. Shame can't exist outside of secrecy. As soon as we start talking about something, it's less shameful, especially if we talk about it with somebody who is empathic and able to see us and hear us. And so this requirement of you as a child to keep things hidden, to keep that big part of yourself hidden, your family life is an enormous part of a child's identity. Having to keep that hidden is shameful. It creates that sense that there's something wrong with you, that there's something that needs to be kept hidden, that you need to keep things secretive in order to be acceptable and accepted by the world somehow. Of course, all of this would have been projections from your parents, who would have felt unacceptable themselves, and therefore who didn't want what they would have perceived as their most unacceptable selves, the versions of themselves that were maybe very angry or critical or unkind or dismissive. They want to keep all of that. They would want to keep that hidden, which is why you wouldn't have been allowed to talk about anything that was happening with other people. And so all of this creates this atmosphere of shame and of needing to hide and needing to be secretive. And again, that all contributes to this disconnection from your authentic self, because then you're going through life hiding and feeling that you need to hide. And that's where really the shame comes in. So hopefully this has been helpful, just to consider, if this was your experience, if any of this resonates, just to consider how it's maybe affected you over the years. And in future episodes, obviously, we'll be talking much more continuously about how to heal, how to recover that connection with yourself that has been lost. So until then, do take care of yourself. Goodbye.